very much. You know, I came to a realization as I was watching that last speaker that, you know, they speak of the sandwich generation, the generation that has to look after young children at the same time as aging parents. I'm kind of your sandwich speaker. I get squeezed in between Sir Ken Robinson, who's one of the funniest and most insightful folks I've seen in a long time, and Terry McBride, who's probably one of the most creative geniuses in the business side of the music business that Canada's ever produced. So you're kind of stuck with me. But in the next 18 or so minutes, and if I could get my remote control, we could move through this presentation even quicker. In the next 18 or so minutes, I'm going to walk you through a couple of things, actually. Let's see if we can get this to work. There we go. First of all, 18 minutes to me is kind of humorous. I can't say hello in 18 minutes. So strap yourselves in, I'm going to talk really fast. I have been blessed in my life with a tremendous number of opportunities. I consider myself so fortunate. And along the way, I've learned a couple of things, and in preparing for today, it was suggested to me that I share a few of those with you. So I picked 8 of them. I got a list of about 20 that I've developed, so I've touched on 8. I'll point out that they're not all that technical. I mean, I have a business background. I run technology companies. I recently came out of, as was mentioned in the introduction, I was an MLA in the provincial government for 6.5 years. I was a cabinet minister for economic development and labor and all kinds of really fascinating opportunities in the public service side. What you're about to see isn't all that technical, and I think it's because, and this is, watch this, I'm going to connect the dots for you here. This is because I'm a musician as well. And I think this is how I interpret all the dry stuff of government and the rather technical and capitalistic free enterprise stuff of business, and somehow out of that, have a whole lot of fun. And so I'm going to share a little of that with you, and then I'm going to get to the main part of the presentation, frankly, which is I want to leave you with something that I think you need to think about. Because I'm thinking about it, and I've got a head start on you by about 18 to 20 years, depending on how old you are in the audience at the moment. So I'm going to share that with you as well. So let's talk about what I've learned. I'm going to go through these really fast because the second part of this takes a little bit more time. So here's a couple of things for you to take away on it. And I've actually done an hour presentation on these kind of things, so I'm going to have to be really quick, and I'll bear with me. So first of all, this actually picks up on something that Ken Robinson was just talking about. I believe that you should embrace every opportunity out there to fail, especially when at the age that you are now, because the cost is insignificant in the grand scheme of your life. You will not learn if you don't fail. If you have a series of successes for 20 years, you'll never really know whether you're just lucky or not. Failure is where you learn. Embrace it. Don't be afraid of it. Celebrate it, frankly. Try not to do it too often. But by all means, do not be afraid of it. Secondly, you are all possessing enormous gifts. You just need to figure out what they are. And in my view, this comes down to instincts. In my case, the biggest mistakes I made in my business career are when my instincts told me not to do something, and I did it. Or when my instinct said, do something, and I failed to do it. And it was a very quick pattern that developed. And so I learned to trust my instincts enormously. If you want to take a bit of a business bent on this, and many of you are business students, this is a business one for you. As an operating executive, my number one job, especially when I embrace a new organization, is to make myself redundant. I should be able to get hit by a car and nobody notices. But they shouldn't notice operationally that I'm no longer there. Only then can you devote your time to these more heady concepts of vision and strategy. Simplicity. This one I borrowed some of the wording from the late Steve Jobs because he nailed this really, really, really well. Most of what is required to be successful in any endeavor, in particular business, is actually quite simple. The challenge is actually to achieve that simplicity because complexity is actually way easier to live with. Number 5, no cheating there. To achieve simplicity, in my view, you have to identify the stuff that's relevant. If it's not relevant, stop doing it. Then get very good at it, be effective at it. And once you've achieved effectiveness, then focus on being efficient, doing it faster, better, stronger, more with less, and all that kind of stuff. But it starts with relevance. Next, this is a big one. This is probably, if I had to rank them, this would be my number 1. Communication solves 80% of all business problems that you will ever encounter. Angry customer? Guaranteed. Here's the rub. Bad communication probably causes 80% of all the challenges that you're ever going to encounter in both your professional and personal lives. I love this one. This is advice that was given to me when I was your age. Find a good advisor your own age and grow old together. I've known my lawyer for 20 years. Yes, when I started in business. He was barely called to the bar, I think, when I first met him. This is for the lawyers in the room, or the aspiring lawyers. I've had this from personal experience. The only thing more expensive than a good lawyer is a cheap one. Hire a cheap lawyer, see how it goes. You'll never make that mistake twice. Okay, let me move on from there. Now, there we go, we'll experience with that. Let me touch on this. Your generation is going to face some unique challenges that have never been seen before. And you're going to face them collectively. And in my view, it's driven primarily from this concept right here. Earth's population is on track to hit 9 billion people by the year 2040. Okay? Here's the rub. It took 30 years to increase our population by 1 billion people between the year 1930 and 1960. The most recent billion that we added, apparently it was last Monday, when we reached 7 billion people. It only took 11 years to add that 7th billion child to the planet. Now, there's a bit of a so what in this, I suppose. Well, first of all, looking beyond the rather important question about whether we can actually feed ourselves, the other thing to notice is that this will, without question, impact Canada. And this will, without question, impact every single one of you. Here's why. The very things, and I wrote this out longhand, the very things that define us as Canadians are going to be strained or threatened in a manner that has never been seen before. And you will not be able to avoid embracing these challenges head on. Now, there's probably a dozen or so examples I could give you of this, but I'm going to focus on the easy one, public health care. It's also, incidentally, the elephant in the room that nobody seems to want to talk about. Here's why I'm going to use healthcare. Three reasons. One, 50 cents. 50 cents refers to the 50 cents on the dollar that we are fast approaching with respect to how much we spend on healthcare. The year 2001, the healthcare budget, let's just pick on BC because the numbers are relatively fresh in my memory. The healthcare budget in BC in 2001 was made $8 billion. Within the next year and a half or so, it'll hit 16. It's doubled in 10 years. It took 40 years from the introduction of this concept that we call public health care, call it early 1960s, to the year 2001 to go from 0 to 8. It took 10 years to go from 8 to 16. Number two, what we call the senior tsunami. No disrespect to anyone involved. The senior tsunami is simply this. Right now, one out of every 7 British Columbians is over the age of 65. Within 15 years, it's going to be 1 out of 4. And they all tie together because of what I refer to as the 80% rule. Here's what that means. 80% of what each one of us will take out of the public health care system, we take out of that system in the last 6 months of our life. So now let's add those 3 up together. So we are going to face a situation, you are going to face a situation within the next 20 to 25 years, where you're going to have a layer of people over the age of 65 who are withdrawing the most from the healthcare system, and the vast majority of the tax revenues needed to sustain it are coming from a disproportionately smaller number of people. And remember what I said about the costs going up? So you can't avoid this. And this is really, really important. Abdication of this, denying it, delaying it, will not be available to you the way it has been available to the political, societal, community, business leadership the way that it has for the last 50 years. You don't have the luxury of being allowed to be a realist. You're not allowed. And here's why. Because as a leader, I've got to focus on what could be or what must be. Reality deals with what is. I don't have time to deal with that. I have to focus on where we need to go. And if I do that, you develop this really cool defensive mindset, which is simply this. Failure is not an option. I have had, as I mentioned, I've been blessed with some wonderful opportunities. I've taken over some ridiculously dysfunctional organizations in my life and managed to save them. And the simple reason we did is because we have to. And you just can't allow your brain to go into that other space. Now, the second reason I remain an optimist is because I actually think that many of the basics that have proven successful for the last couple of 100 years are going to continue to stay the same. The first of those, in my view, are the fundamentals of leaders and leadership. Again, this is a topic we could talk about forever. But that piece has not changed. What it takes to be a good leader, the character traits, the mental disciplines, the creativity, the trust in other people, the ability to grow people and grow teams around you, get people focused on a common endpoint. That's not going to change. I don't care what technology you introduce into the mix. Number two, I'm going to come back to this whole notion of simplicity. It will continue to be an objective for any smart leader, and it will continue to be very difficult to attain. And here's one where we get very generationally specific. While the communication conduits that we have are going to continue to evolve, and we'll use as our poster child for this one, Facebook. the human motivations and the behaviors behind that communication, the desire to communicate, to hear and be heard, will not change. And the third reason why I believe all this is because, frankly, I'm living the dream again right now. I have just been honored with inheriting the reins of a 124-year-old organization called the Vancouver Board of Trade. This is an organization that has been around since before the mainstream adoption of the telephone, the automobile, the television, wireless devices, cellular phones, the internet. It has survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, a dozen recessions, and it's been around since before manned spaceflight. Why? Because it continues to do one very simple thing, which is to address the need of the business community, particularly the small business community, to help each other to become successful and provide for families and communities. And secondly, and this is a very big part of what we do at the Board of Trade, it helps us define a little piece of what British Columbia is all about. Because the Board of Trade has a very large number, 450 people, blew me away when I learned that 450 people are involved as volunteers on various committees that are not focused on capitalistic free enterprise things. We've been credited recently as being the driving force behind getting the homelessness agenda advanced. In the year 2005, a very, very important letter was written by the Vancouver Board of Trade, and this apparently got a lot of balls rolling, many of which were frankly taken forward with Mayor Sullivan when he was in office. So I've seen this before, so I believe all this stuff because I'm living it. So here's, however, a little complication point. 21st century considerations. This is going to be different for you than it was, frankly, even for me, looking back over the last 50-odd years or so. And these are entirely your fault. I'm quite comfortable attributing blame on this one. First of all, intellectual laziness. This is a neat one. Now, don't throw anything at me. Wait till you see the definition. There is a very real risk, and again, I wrote this out longhand because I want to make sure it's really well understood. Very real risk that the self-directed communications that we have right now are leading to self-assurance and ignorance about what's happening outside our self-defined and controlled bubble of information flow. We now define our communities in a very virtual manner. Our 30 closest friends might include 2 people in Iraq, 2 in London, England, 2 in Adelaide, Australia, and 4 in Langley. And we're brought together because we're all into, I don't know, knitting. This is how we define our communities right now. Second, there's a new leadership attribute that is quickly evolving. And that is simply this. A modified must-have characteristics for any of our leaders going forward, whether they're business and community, but definitely politically, is not just being media savvy, but being social media savvy. Now, in case any of you are starting to feel just a little bit smug about that, this should scare the hell out of you. Because I heard a few weeks ago that Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt could not be elected today. 2 of the greatest leaders in the last 500 years. One tackled the Great Depression, the other one took out Hitler. They could not be elected in today's CNN, internet, Facebook world. That should bother you a great deal. They had a contempt for the media, and they didn't play the game. They were focused on really, really big, important issues, and we couldn't elect them in today's world. So that should really bother you. So here's your challenge. Whether you are leading a business, whether you are leading a government, or whether you're leading a sports team, achieving 2 really, really important things, community engagement and citizenship, what we expect of each other in our communities, citizenship, will become more awkward and inconvenient than ever before. Think how many of you avoid phone calls at dinner from somebody who is doing a telephone survey. We skip through the commercials on TV, so we're not aware of what our business community is trying to do for us and the stuff we could buy and sell. We don't want to take polling questions. We don't want to do political answers, or political leaders have a sense of what's important to us. We were very good at isolating ourselves, and it makes it very awkward to engage in our communities and to become good citizens. Here's a conundrum. It will become exponentially more important than it has ever been in human history for us to do both of those things. Here's your wonderful, ironic moment. The same generation, that would be you, that created this phenomena has no choice but to deal with some very, very glaring shortcomings. As I mentioned before, I'm a shameless optimist, and I have every belief that you're going to do it just fine. Thank you so much for having me here. All the best.